Cloud, okay. Yeah, lady, we know that. Okay, so we're recording. And now I'm going, and for some reason, I'm also having trouble with hosting. When I make somebody else the host, it knocks me off. So I'm now going to turn it over to Laura and let her take it away. Okay, yes.
Well, hi. Well, welcome all. I think most of us know each other. If we do not, I am Laura Smith. Oh, look, another Jeff Gingold entered the room. It could be anyone. And so if we haven't met, my husband Aaron and I moved to Reno 4 years ago now. We have a 3-year-old who helps me alternately keep track of and lose track of time. And I am delighted to be hosting today for the lovely Myra and Jeff, who otherwise run Sacred Sinai. And today's topic, of course, is converts, what to do, what not to do, and what to understand.
Yeah, I'll try to send it to you. Okay, bye.
Our panelists today.
Can you mute her?
You tried that, didn't you, Keita? Okay, I'll try. Bye-bye.
There we go. Our panelists today are Jane Townley. Thank you for being here. Sharon Blake. Thank you for being here. And Ignacio. Yeah. So I thought we would start today by just asking each of you kind of what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did you have a congregation or a person in mind when you came around to Judaism, or was it sort of the pull of Judaism that brought you to the people or ideology? And maybe we could start by just introducing ourselves generally and what you would like to be called when people ask you questions, and then you could tell us a little bit. So Jane Townley, if you don't mind starting us off.
Good afternoon. I'm Jane Townley. I prefer to be called Jane. I will respond to Grandma, however. What brought me to Judaism was both a congregation and individuals. The congregation was Temple Sinai, and the individuals were Myra and my husband, Jeff Gingold, the original Jeff Gingold, not one of the other Jeff Gingolds who joined.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of years ago. It was a lot of decades ago. Do you want me to go on, Laura, or should we let the other participants?
No, I think it's lovely if you could sort of give us what you think is important about your story and how you came to the official end of your conversion.
I can do that. So I'm a lifelong Renoite, Nevadan. I was born in this community, and I grew up and was a part of Trinity Episcopal. I taught Sunday school there. My daughter went there. My parents went there. That was my home congregation, but it never felt like home. And when I started to date Jeff, he brought me to Temple Sinai, and I walked in the door and I had an instant sense of homecoming. I was greeted with such warmth and acceptance by Grandma Ruthie Dickens and Grandma Ethel Jaffe and the Garfingles, Jake and Mary, people who were the founders of our congregation and who were always so warm and so welcoming. And then I met Myra, and I had this fabulous world open up where I realized that women mattered in a religion, that we were counted as a minion, that we celebrated our matriarchs, that we had stories and voices. And it certainly went hand in hand with my personal view of the world. So this fabulous sense of homecoming, two people whom I love very dearly, Jeff and Myra, and then the epiphany of women becoming a part of and a significant part of a religion. And so I began to study and I began to participate. And over a period of, 3 or 4 years, I made what was for me an incredibly easy decision to convert. I had no agony about it. I never second guessed the decision. Myra performed the ceremony that was part of my conversion. And frankly, I've never looked back. I consider myself a pretty significant member of Temple Sinai. I participate in things, less now that Jeff and I are getting older, but when we were younger, we did a lot more. And I continue to love our little congregation and the group of people who are very dear to me. And that's my story.
Jane, what happened when you went to Arizona with your daughter?
Well, this is a story that a number of you probably know. Our daughter, Sarah, came over to the congregation with me and was kind of an off and on participant. I think she's never embraced any religion. At any rate, she grew up, came of age with Myra as the rabbi. And Jeff and I were traveling. We went to Arizona for a conference, and we went to Friday night services, as we generally try to do whenever we travel. And we walked in and sat down, and the rabbi and the cantor, both males, walked up to the bima, and Sarah looked. She looked again. She leaned over and she said, "Mommy, where's the rabbi?" And Jeff and I pointed at the rabbi and the cantor and said, "They're right up there on the bima." And she looks at me, she says, "Oh, men can be rabbis?" And yeah, they can. But that's one of Jeff's favorite stories, and mine too, and maybe even Myra's.
I got a lot of those, but yeah.
Yes, and I got to hear that story early on when we arrived here, and we were so welcoming. Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Jane. We'll be back shortly. Sharon Blake, if you don't mind introducing yourself and how you want to be addressed, and whether your story starts with a person or with Judaism as a whole.
Great, thank you. I almost fell off my seat when I saw Julia Weinberg. I hope the camera comes back on, friend. I have not, it's been a long time. I live in California. I have for the last 7 years. And before that, I was very much, my whole family was very much part of Sinai. So it's nice seeing all of you. Sharrone, my name is Sharrone. And what else do I want to say? I came to Judaism, which I don't usually describe it that way, actually. I ended a relationship, and a few weeks later, my father died suddenly. And a few weeks later, the way I describe it is like a radio, and the volume kept getting ticked up a little bit. And I just kept hearing, "You need to go to synagogue, you need to go to synagogue." And it just kept getting louder and louder in my head. And I was like, well, this is going to be different enough for me. I was raised Baptist. And I knew this was going to be different enough where I needed to go with someone, as opposed to just walking in the door and doing it on my own. And so that's where I was. It's like, I need to do this with someone. You know, I get it. I need to do this because the voice in my head keeps getting louder. And then I met my Jeff Blanck, who at the time was, and this was in Marin County, actually. He was teaching at the religious school, going to services Friday night, Saturday morning. They had a Thursday morning minyan. He was just all about it. And when he talked about Judaism, he had a sparkle in his eyes. And that's what I wanted. I wanted someone where it was still, you know, it was juicy and so I met him through work, and I said, we were both getting ready to go out of town. And I said, when we come back in town, could I go to services with you? And he said, yes. So although it might look from the outside that I converted because of him, because Jeff is a Jewish man, I converted because of me. The first service, I'm going to get weepy. I get weepy. It's not a thing. This first service I went to, Rabbi Michael Berenbaum led it. And The way I describe it is I found a home I never knew I had lost. So when you were talking about a homecoming, I also have a homecoming, but mine was a little bit different. It was, everything felt like I knew this, but I didn't know why I knew it. It felt comfortable. It's like, well, of course. Every time I learned something, I'm like, well, of course. Of course, that's how it is. I just thought I was like this. I didn't know that it was because I was Jewish, and there's a whole group of people like forever who are like this. So it's more like I became more of who I am than I really did anything. Even my misspelled first name is Hebrew. And I was a, Black little girl born in Puerto Rico from Baptist people. And my mom heard this name, and then my dad misspelled it, and here I am. So when I converted, I just kept my name. I didn't get a new name because it's like, I got a name. Yeah, so it really wasn't a decision. It was more just stepping into who I am. Yeah, so that's my story in a nutshell.
Lovely, lovely. Been trying not to interrupt, but also all the yeses. Yes. Perfect, beautiful. And before I say too much, Ignacio, do you mind telling us who you are and whether it was a person or the whole shebang altogether?
Hi, so I'm Ignacio Montoya. You can call me Ignacio. It was really sort of the whole shebang altogether. It definitely was not any individual person by any stretch, but it was definitely people I knew. So I grew up Catholic, and when I was young, I was very into Catholicism. It really appealed to me. We're talking preteen years. I love the ritual. I love the calendar. I love the stories. I loved the theology. I loved, just that it grappled with particular questions and had answers and had rituals that appealed to me. And so, as I got older through my teenage years and into college, I became less connected to Catholicism. I think this is not unusual for people to go through that process. So that by the time I was, let's say, in my early mid-20s, I didn't really have any kind of affiliation at all. I would have said I'm a lapsed Catholic if somebody asked about my religious tradition. But I was always, even at that time, interested in religion in some ways as in an academic perspective. So I liked reading about different religions and learning about the way that people worshiped around the world. So I was very interested in that way. And then sometime in my late 20s, I started to become interested in becoming connected to some sort of religious practice. I saw the value of it. I think part of the issue was that I became skeptical of religion in college and beyond. Rightfully so, I still am. I think that it, does a lot of harm in the world. But I also know that it does a lot of good, and that I had found this kind of connection to it when I was a kid, and I was looking for it again as an adult. So I started exploring, and I started by looking at Catholicism again. And I did find, I was living in LA at the time, I did find some communities that were more open to progressive ideas of how to be. There were certain parts of the dogma that I found particularly personally problematic, but also sort of problematic in terms of just the way that they looked at the world. So I did try Catholicism, and ultimately I ended up not sticking to it, partly because the dogma really was so strong. And there were some things that I would consider to be deal breakers about the dogma in Catholicism. And I know that's not the way that everybody practices, but I also wanted to connect not just to the way everybody practices, but connect intellectually to a religious tradition. So I needed to be able to buy into that. I tried the Unitarians, and actually the Unitarians were total opposites, and in fact, too opposite. Everything goes and everyone's accepted, and there was no edge, nothing to grapple with. I actually liked that about Catholicism, that there were these things that you sort of had to struggle with. And as this was happening, I was also working at an independent school in the LA area. And I had a lot of Jewish students, and I knew, I had Jewish friends as well. And at the time I was teaching 5th grade, and after my students had left a couple of years after that, they were becoming bar and bat mitzvah. I got invited to their ceremonies. I started to get invited to Passover dinner. And I had a friend who also started going to not this Temple Sinai, but the Temple Sinai in LA for these once a month. They called them Friday Night Live. And so I started to become more and more interested in Judaism in all its forms. And then at that point, I moved to New York, and I had a friend there who was Jewish, and I said, I'm interested in going to a synagogue. So he went shul shopping with me. And this is before I had converted. And we ended up at a synagogue in New York, B'nai Jeshurun, and I loved it, and so did he. He stopped coming. I mean, he basically just sort of came for to support me. And I remember I became more and more interested in the religion, started learning more and more on my own. And I do remember the moment where I thought, I think I need to do this. It was actually my first Yom Kippur, the first Yom Kippur that I observed. So I was living in New York at the time, and I wasn't a member of any synagogue. I wasn't Jewish, but the LGBT synagogue, CBST, had an open door policy. Basically, you didn't have to, you had to register for tickets, but you didn't have to pay, and anybody was welcome. So I went with my friend to the first to Kol Nidre, and I loved it. It was, basically everything that I thought it would be. I then decided to come the next day on my own. My friend didn't come, and I basically observed my first Yom Kippur as a Yom Kippur. I fasted, I went to synagogue, and then I did end up breaking the fast with some friends. And it was then that I thought, I'm connecting to this at this particularly deep level. I think this is time for me to do this. And so that's when I started to explore what it meant to convert and started taking the conversion classes. And here I am.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh. I love all these stories and what I know of the two personalities that I do know and the one that I am getting to know. It is good to meet you today, Sharrone. But yeah, that there are just so very many different paths to the same decision, if you can even call it that. So my story is, of course, not huge. And today we have 3 fantastic speakers, but just briefly to throw my 2 cents in here, I, like Jane, always just never felt at home in what I was raised with. And for me, I came up in an unaffiliated household altogether, that we were a household of what the census calls religious nuns, even though we are very much not nuns, and longed for something before I found the person that would help me door to access this. And I'm so very grateful that I got through the door. But thank you both, all 3 of you. Sorry, there's not a word for that, for sharing so far. I thought we might next, because it is the focus of Sacred Sinai's mission, talk about what felt welcoming and what didn't feel welcoming when you first came to practicing Judaism in a temple community. So we might open this up first to whoever feels like they have something to share, and then move on to the other 2 speakers. But does anyone want to start? Remember back the first few months. All right, Sharrone, kick us off, girl.
When I started going to services and studying, I kept waiting for a pushback. I kept waiting for someone to say something or something to happen. And it absolutely never happened. I went to my first Rosh Chodesh gathering at Rodef, and by far I was the youngest person there. And it was my first one, who knew? And it was amazing listening to women telling their stories. I went home and I called my mom and I said, Mom, if I would have closed my eyes, I would have been in a room full of Black women. it was women talking about what they couldn't do growing up, where they were welcome and where they weren't welcome in their life. It very much was one of those places where being a Black woman and being Jewish overlapped, and it was surprising. And I remember, I think I haven't told these stories in so long. I think it's when I actually had my formal conversion at the synagogue. I just remember like a sea of people hugging and kissing me, you know, just like people coming and hugging and kissing me. And that has been consistently my experience of being Jewish. This is my fourth congregation that I'm part of now in Eureka, California. It is small, it is tiny. This is a very rural community. So there's that. It's a different Jewish experience, and it's also has obviously very similar threads as well. I have always felt welcomed. And I will tell this one story. It's very sweet. My mom, I was talking to my mom about wanting to get Hanukkah, and no, I'm telling the story wrong. Let me back up. My mom was talking about she wanted to get me one. That was it. And it was very sweet because I didn't ask her for one. And it was definitely one of those things like, oh, mom's okay with this. More than just saying, yeah, I'm okay with it. It's like, really, she was okay with it. And she's like, she called me by my middle name, Lisa. And she's like, Lisa, I went to the store and I couldn't find it anywhere. And I said, Mom, I said, you know how the Black people hair products are in the corner in the back? I said, that's where the Jewish people stuff is. So I said, next time, go back and ask. And she's like, oh, I got it. Okay. So again, there was this kind of crossover about, you know, with, you know, the things that we need are kind of over in the side, in the corner, in the back. Yeah, but that was a really lovely moment because I knew she really supported me in that moment. And what she said was, you have to have something. You have to have some kind of faith. And if this is yours, that's fine. And she died a few years back, and it was pretty interesting. I think if someone would have walked into her home, they would not have been able to figure her out. She had a lot of Jewish stuff from our family's influence. And then, you know, she had some Black Jesus stuff going on. I mean, it was a house you'd go, and then there's kimonos on the wall. So it was beautiful. It was really beautiful.
Oh, it sounds like it. Thank you so much, Sharon. That's lovely. So I think we'll ask Jane and ask Ignacio in their preferred order about things that were and weren't welcoming, and then we'll open it up to the floor, and then maybe we'll bring it back for some sort of talks in the second half here. But Jane and Ignacio, do either of you want to lead this conversation?
I'll go.
Okay, thank you, Jane.
I have always found the Sinai congregation to be endlessly welcoming as a body. I have been greeted warmly. I have been included. I have developed some very deep, deep friendships within our congregation who mean so very much to me. And I have nothing but positive things to say about our congregation. However, I'm going to give us a little bit of the other side, which is the individuals. In my house, we call these individuals Jewier than thou. And by that, I mean they are the people who see their Judaism as the Judaism, the right way to do it, the right way to approach other people. And over the years, from these individuals, some of whom are still with us, some of whom are not, I have had, well, you're not really a Jew because you're a convert. Or you're just not as Jewish and you don't get it. Or let me explain this to you because there's no way you know. And those comments, those individuals have been unbelievably hurtful because I consider myself a Jew, period, end of story, full stop. They are very much in the minority. And 95% of my experience with Temple Sinai has been so warm and so loving. And as Sharrone said, the people who run up and give you hugs and kisses and just make you feel good about yourself by being there. The approach to inclusiveness is so important to me. And we live it, I feel, as a congregation. We live that inclusiveness. So my story is overall very positive. I have a lot of good things to say and a couple of not so good. You're up, Ignacio.
All right, that's about as well for reality. All right, Ignacio, it's you.
Right. So yeah, I would say that by and large, I have been welcomed at, I really have participated in just 2 Jewish communities, which is Temple Sinai and B'nai Jeshurun in New York. But I've gone to other synagogues here and there, and I've certainly never felt a sense of being unwelcome in those places. I'll say just a couple things though to complicate that a little bit. One is the place where I've sort of been most questioned, or the context where I've been most questioned, has actually been from secular Jews who have no religious practice. But who identify culturally as Jewish. And this hasn't been very many, but these tend to be friends of friends who I've known in other contexts, and they say, oh, Ignacio converted to Judaism. And there is this sense of, there's a questioning of why did you do it? But I think deeper than that, it's the fact that I was connected to some sort of religious tradition, that they had their own sort of fraught relationship with Judaism. And what was fraught for them was the religion, was the practice, was the theology and all of that. And so the fact that that's something that I was connected to, I think was a bit of a disconnect for them. And in fact, the thing that they had that I didn't was this sort of growing up culturally Jewish experience. So that was an interesting thing that I observed with again, these would be like friends that are secular, not in a synagogue context. In a synagogue context, my Judaism itself has never been questioned. My motivations have, and I think that's okay. People see my name. I can derail a conversation in hey, turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself and answer this question about whatever. And the question of what is your name immediately derails the conversation. So then we had to talk about why is it that I have this name, but I'm a Jew, am I Sephardic, et cetera, et cetera. I don't particularly mind that too much, although that is, just something to note. I will say that one of the difficulties that I've had as a convert really sort of does intersect with some of the other parts of my identity, and that are very much grounded in the fact that I am a convert. So one of them, I think, connects more to my experience in New York. So at B'nai Jeshurun, I went to, I volunteered at the homeless shelter. I went to adult education classes, and I went to services very, very regularly. But I didn't actually form strong bonds with people there. I made friends, and they were like homeless shelter friends or friends for during the adult education, but not people that I then sort of brought into my life more broadly. I had plenty of other Jewish friends, but it was interesting to me that I didn't bring in new people from the synagogue. And I think one of the things that has made me feel a little bit less connected to a community, particularly in this case in New York, is the fact that I don't have a Jewish family. I don't have Jewish parents. I don't have Jewish uncles or grandparents. I don't have this sort of lineage that I can turn to in the way that other people can. And I sort of get this double whammy in that I don't have a Jewish partner and kids that are being raised Jewish. And there's a lot of Judaism that is very family oriented. And I saw that both at B'nai Jeshurun and at Temple Sinai, that the programming is very much geared towards people with families. And again, this is sort of an intersection of various parts of my identities, but certainly one of them is the fact that I am a convert and don't have these natural connections to Jewish community. So I think that's one of the ways in which I wouldn't say that I'm unwelcome in any of these spaces, but that perhaps these spaces don't feel like they were made for me, like I belong there fully. So it's a fine distinction, because certainly people have come on in and talk, and that's never been an issue for me. But just if we look deeper at who these spaces are designed for, they're not designed for people that don't have strong Jewish families in one way or another. And I think another thing for me that sort of again ties directly to my status as a convert is the fact that, as I mentioned, I really converted for the religious practice, for the spirituality. And I also come from, an academic background and a queer background, where, as I mentioned before, religion is viewed with a certain level of skepticism, both among academics and among the queer community. And I agree with them. I'm aligned with the skepticism of the ways in which religion can be problematic. But what that means then is that, so I'm aligned with them and I agree with them. And yet I find this deep connection to Judaism, to Jewish practice, to ritual, to tradition, to the calendar, to all of that. And what I've then found is that this is another place where these parts of my identity don't find a very comfortable home. And this was easier for me to do in New York because it's a big city, tons of different people, tons of different types of Jews. And so I found it a little bit easier to find a place where these two parts of my identity could sort of come together. A part that sort of really sort of was critical of religion, more broadly, but also that found a home in religion as well. And that's a lot harder to do in a smaller town when you just don't have the sort of the diversity that you find in these bigger cities that have larger Jewish populations. And again, this doesn't speak to me feeling unwelcome, but it's another way in which I feel like these spaces are not made for someone like me. And that someone like me is in part because I'm a convert, and in part because I have these other parts of my identities that come together to form sort of the holistic me. So it's a tricky question for me because, it really depends on the context, and it really depends on how deep you're going in terms of the way that I feel or don't feel like I belong, even if I feel that the doors are open to me.
Yeah, thank you, Ignacio, especially having been in a bunch of different places. And of course, also Sharrone, having been in different places. It does matter where you are and kind of what the norms are where you are currently practicing. So thank you. In order to give everyone else a chance to talk about things that matter to you, I thought we might flip the script here for the next 20 minutes or so and take questions from everybody else, and then we'll end with some more speaking from our speakers. But is there anyone in the audience that has questions about what to say and what matters to converts and how to interact? All right, Chris, looks like you have a question. Go for it.
I have a question, but I converted to Judaism. I fell in love with my college sweetheart, and we were in college during the late 60s, so it was Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane, those times. We really didn't have any religion. My father had been a minister, and it was really didn't really have any choice about going to Sunday school or not. And so when I got to college, I just kind of threw it all off and was done with it. And then one of the things that attracted me to Judaism, besides my wife, was the Jewish sense of humor. And I wanted to bring that up. I think a sense of humor is a very important way of going through life because we need it. And there's something about the Jewish sense of humor that continues to amuse me and stimulate me and attract me. The other thing I liked about Temple Sinai, I also have always felt very, very welcome there, is that no one ever came to me and said, why don't you convert? It was my choice, and I feel really good about it. So I don't really have a question so much. I just wanted to bring up the aspect of the Jewish sense of humor, because I think it's an important part of how Jews see the world.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. I married a joker myself, so I understand. Absolutely. Humor was not a thing in my family. It took a while to get used to levity as an adult. Fantastic.
Great.
Other questions from our very group by now?
Hi, Jane has raised a hand up. Yeah.
Hi. This question is really for the rabbi. It seems to me like I remember hearing something many years ago that once a person converted, and this doesn't reference this group, but that actually people weren't supposed to talk about it for like 100 or 1,000 years or something because they were fully accepted. Do you?
I have to say, I don't know that specifically, but it's interesting you asked that because I was going to throw out a question that really dovetails right into that. It certainly is the case in Judaism that there is no such thing as a convert. You're a Jew or you're not a Jew. Now, how you got there, you may have gotten there by you were born to Jewish parents, or you may have gotten there by you came to it through some journey, like some of the journeys we've heard, but it doesn't exist because once you become a Jew and you complete that process, the Talmud says you're like a child newborn. I mean, so you just are, which I was going to ask the question because we've got a number of, and you can hear why I'm stuttering in a minute. We have a number of persons on this call that were not born Jewish. I'll put it that way. I'm curious what people think about even that. I mean, the term Jew by choice, because we're all trying to do our language sensitively these days in so many different ways, and it's complicated to say the least. But the word convert was kind of struck from the vocabulary precisely because either you're a Jew or you're not a Jew. So convert didn't really make any sense. So, but then if you wanted to talk about somebody whose Jewish journey was other than being born into a Jewish family, so then the term Jew by choice got coined. And I just would love to hear what people think about all that. I mean, my feeling sort of is, I don't know why we need a term at all, actually. Hello, who are you? What's your story? And your story, when we get to the point where it's appropriate to talk to you about your story, you'll tell me your story. But somehow we do seem to still need these labels, and I am really conflicted about that. But Iris, your question, I don't know the text that you're referring to exactly. It may be, and I just don't know it. But certainly the tradition is that once you become Jewish through the conversion process, you're a Jew. That's the end of it. There's no adjective to it.
I would love to see adjectives go away altogether. I don't like gay Jew. I don't like Jew of color. I don't like Jew by choice. I like Jew. End of story.
I can offer a contrast. Well, I can offer a contrasting view to that.
That's right.
And I think that for me, first of all, I agree, Myra, that it depends. It's when it's your time to tell your story. Like I do find it somewhat frustrating that when it comes time to like turn to your neighbor and introduce yourself, and that's when I have to tell my story. So I agree with you that it's can sort of it can be a little bit abrupt to ask somebody. I do find that label helpful just because of the point that I mentioned earlier about the different parts of my identity. And I think this applies in different perspectives. So on the one hand, for example, I don't have the same, I have to honor the fact with especially I was talking about these culturally Jewish friends of friends who had asked me about like, why did you convert? And part of it is because I think they felt in some ways their own cultural upbringing, because they had a fraught relationship with their own upbringing, they found it threatened in some way. And I think it's important to recognize that, growing up Jewish, especially in particular environments, is not an easy thing to do. And that that I don't have that experience. I think it's important for me to recognize that I didn't have to worry about the sort of the Christmas issue when I was in elementary school, and that I don't have a name that identifies me as Jewish, and that sometimes you get teased for that. I think it's important to recognize that there are people that do have that. And I think that for me, part of the way in which I do it is to say, okay, well, I'm a Jew by choice, I'm a convert. And similarly, I did have a particular growing up experience that doesn't look at all Jewish, and I don't want to erase that either. I do sort of like to introduce myself as a Jew by choice or a convert, because I think it honors both of these things. It honors the fact that there are people that have had growing up experiences that sometimes can be fraught because of the prejudices that are out there that I didn't have. And it also recognizes the fact that I do actually have sort of this rich growing up experience that isn't connected to the experience of other people in the community. So for me, it is helpful to, when it's appropriate, and I think, the individual should decide. So, if there are people that don't want to be called a Jew by choice and they just want to consider themselves Jewish, I think that's something that we should respect. But for me, it is important to recognize these other parts of what it means to have grown up or to not have grown up Jewish. And so that's why for me, it's important to recognize all these parts of one's identity. And for me, that's connected to the fact that I am a Jew by choice as opposed to a Jew by birth.
Love that. And I love that also there can be just everyday designations of Jewish and then more advanced search terms depending on what you're looking for and whose, sort of childhood or early adult experiences we're looking to honor. So thank you, Ignacio. Other questions from the committee before we get into how identity stuff happens?
I would like to add a little bit to that last conversation. I describe myself as Jewish, and internally, and I have said this out loud as well, I think, simply because you're born Jewish doesn't, it mean you could be very culturally Jewish and not really embrace the faith bits. So I think of, any person who embraces those parts is a Jew by choice. You can be born Jewish with all the lineage, but if you don't claim it for yourself, if it's just something that was given to you by your parents or your community, but you haven't held onto it as an adult yourself, I think we all have to make that decision. So I think all of us are Jewish by choice. Whether, it doesn't really matter about your lineage. You have to claim it to make it yours.
True. So I do have notes from Steve first, and then perhaps Jeff that had questions. Steve, you wanted to read something? Sorry, can you unmute yourself?
Okay, sorry. I wrote an email about a year ago to some of the people who were on the committee that had the Jews and race presentation. And I'll read what the email was. At the Wednesday, March 24th Social Action Committee meeting, it was discussed how well the three-part program Jews and Race was received. During the discussion, finding new subjects for additional series was asked to be suggested. And I have now watched all three sessions of a very important discussion. But I now think the discussion has started and needs to be continued. These were very powerful and need to be viewed over and over again. I am a Jew by choice. When I and my ex-wife went through a joint conversion, the rabbi said it would be best if we did not reveal that we were converts to fellow Jews. I have never followed that advice, although too often it would have made life easier. We went through conversion in Indiana in the early 1970s. We moved to Reno in 1986, and for various reasons did not join the synagogue or have a close relationship with local Jewish community until 2014, when my daughter moved back to Reno and wanted to become a member of a synagogue. I am sorry to say that for those 28 years, it was easier to feel as an accepted Jew than it has been for the last 7 years since I've been a part of the local Jewish community. During those 28 years, I was accepted as being a Jew by the Reno community. I have never hidden the fact that I was a Jew by conversion and never would claim otherwise. I cannot name the number of times I've been personally hurt by various forms of exclusion by my community. I am Jewish enough to serve the community, but not Jewish enough to be considered an equal by some. To be fair, those who don't accept me as an equal do not seem to be participants of this series. I've had warm relationships with some members of our community and that is why I will remain a member of our community. I think Jews by choice have a better understanding of the Jews of color than maybe others within our community. And recently, to even feel more uncomfortable, we had the presentation of the Holocaust Remembrance Dinner or meeting we had the other night. I sat down with a couple that were prominent members of our community. I had a conversation with him. She would not even look at me or recognize that I was sitting there. That is some of the instances I have run into over the last 50 years. Sorry to put a bummer on this, but that's.
No, I'm glad you brought it up, Steve. Thank you.
Sorry you had to live through it.
We've all, I think, had isolated experiences of, yeah, people who are uncomfortable with the process of conversion, or like I, still have a young face, thanks mom for genetics. And so I've had people tell me that maybe God placed me with the wrong family, things like that, isolated things. Do you feel like yours was more systemic, Steve, that it's built into Temple Sinai or into the Jewish community as a whole?
Well, I guess I've been a convert for 50 years now, and I'm still waiting to be fully accepted.
Yeah.
I think that's not a good thing.
Fair enough. Other speakers, do you want to comment on this?
Like I said, I'm sorry to put a bummer on this, but
No, please. I mean, that's why we're here today.
That's exactly why we're here today. And I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. And I'm really sorry that that has been your experience, friend.
Yeah, I think I've had a good experience, but I also went into the process, knowing that I was okay, not to say that you should be, Steve, but that I was okay with a certain level of exclusion and skepticism from other people. And that was something that I was willing to accept in order to get the homecoming that I needed for myself. That was a worthwhile trade-off. And then I just hope that it's different for Ronan to be fully something.
Well,
for those of you who don't know us, Ronan is our kid, so he should be considered full.
I lived in a small town in Indiana when I went through conversion. When my family and I finished conversion, we doubled the population, Jewish population of that town. But as I was going through conversion, I didn't hide the fact that I was doing that. And quite frankly, most of my cohorts around said that I would never be accepted by the Jews. And here 50 years later, I still cannot say they were wrong, because I still, unfortunately, don't feel that I'm fully accepted by all Jews. And that's, it's a bummer after this long period.
And I know this thing is 2 Jews and 3 opinions, but I'm afraid it might be more like 5 and 17. I don't know what other people are thinking, but yeah, unfortunately, that may never be an all the time thing. Steve, we love you. Can't speak for everyone at all. There's such a huge range. I know when we moved here from Madison, it was hard. I was used to being in a community where we had access to a mikveh, and that was open to me, and it was hard to move here and have it not be open as a convert. But for me, it's worth the trade-off, and I hope it is for everyone else as well. That said, I think unless there are other urgent questions, we might move questioning into the double-edged sword of service in communities, because I know Ignacio has served, and Sharrone, you served as president, and Steve continues to serve us. Thank you so much. And that Jane and Jeff, of course, serve us all the time, and what that meant for entry into the Jewish community, and what that might have meant for lovingly said, exploitation of the need for converts to fit in. So if anyone has something to say.
You need to unmute, Jane.
Now can you hear me?
Mhm.
I actually served on the board before I converted. And it absolutely did not influence my decision to convert. If it had, it would have influenced it the other direction. Committee sitting is not my go-to, but I love the service in terms of doing meals for any house, when we've tutored bar and bat mitzvahs, when we've done various projects at this. That's great service, but it certainly did not have anything to do with my conversion at all.
Yeah, I agree. The first thing I stepped into was at Emmanuel, actually. And I was the the preschool director there for a time.
You did that at Sinai too, didn't you?
And she ran the religious.
I was
school.
the religious school director there, yeah. And my decisions to step into those roles had to do with family. Jeffrey and I were, and I am way opinionated on this. If we expect our children to show up, we need to show up first and more. So that's how that happened. I worked at the preschool there, and then I wound up I think I worked as a teacher at Sinai, and then I was the director. Jeff taught in the Hebrew school. He taught Hebrew, he's taught in the religious school, he was on the board. He was like, one of many backup rabbi people for services. Yeah, if we're going to ask it of our children, we show up. So if this is important, you show up, and that's what we did. So I didn't feel exploited at all. If anyone ever asked me if I was interested in something, I always took it as a compliment. Yeah.
Good. Can see
Service
the good opinions coming out, Sharon. Yes, other thoughts.
Service was built into my conversion. So part of when I was going through the process, I was taking the Intro to Judaism class. One of the things that the rabbi that was supervising it asked is that I actually do some sort of, he didn't call it service, but just ways to engage with the community. And that's when I started volunteering at the homeless shelter in New York once a month. And I essentially ended up doing that the whole time that I was in New York. So I think for me, it was something that was built into this idea of belonging to the Jewish community. And again, this other point that I have about, I don't have Jewish family. This is one of the things that the rabbi talked to me about, is that I needed to find a way into community. And so this was sort of the easiest way to do it. So it really was sort of built into the expectation when I converted, and I kind of ended up carrying it through. And this is just the way that I am generally. When I started at the university, I said yes to all sorts of service. So it's part of, the way that I'm wired, but it was also something that was encouraged as a way to connect with the Jewish community when I did actually go through the conversion.
Yep, that sounds like you. Thoughts, Jane?
Can I just saw Jeff Ginkle's question in the chat. Was someone going to speak? I'm sorry, Jane, were you going to speak?
Go for it.
No.
Okay. I have absolutely never, ever regretted or even thought about whether or not it was a good idea. Like I said, it wasn't really an intellectual decision. It was more stepping into who I was.
I agree. Basically, what you've done and what I have done is recognize what we already were.
Exactly. Exactly.
And even the hurt that sometimes comes with it, you're still who you are, and you've just recognized who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You finally have a label for who you are.
I thought these beliefs and the way I saw things were just Sharrone until I stepped into this community, and I was like, oh, it's called being Jewish. There's a whole group of people who think this way and feel this way. And, you know, it was, yeah, it was very exciting. You know, I keep having this thought, and I hope, I don't want to be insulting in any way. And I think it's I think it's important to say out loud. I wonder, when I was listening to you, Stephen and Jane, about, you know, people kind of coming at you for being Jewish. And Ignacio, I'd love to hear what you think as well. I wonder if, because I'm Black, there's a certain amount of things that don't even register for me. You know, there's a certain amount of pushback that I don't even register, because I need to live my life. And if I like responded to all the stuff, my life would be full of that as opposed to what I want to do. And I'm just wondering if, I'm wondering about the difference between being a person of color that converts as opposed to being someone who identifies as white converting, and, you know, how kind of the flavor of that.
I think that's a really fair comment. And obviously I cannot address from your perspective with it, but it certainly is valid. The place I've come to is the individuals who've made the unpleasant comments are unpleasant humans.
Well, there you go.
And
That's very
they
true.
deserve all the attention that I give them, which is to say, none.
I do think Sharrone makes a good point, that if you have, I mean, I've had a couple, through virtue of my identity, a couple points of marginalization. And so, like, over the years, I've just become more accustomed to dealing with them and to taking some things like, well, you know what, just got to let it go. And so I do think that that also sort of plays a role in the way that I sort of knew that I wouldn't be fully accepted as Jewish by some members of the Jewish community. It was just sort of a given for me. And so I think even, you know, the ones that I mentioned, these sort of culturally Jewish friends of friends who were like, why are you converting? And why, you know, wait a second, you didn't, you know, grow up with that. It's just sort of something that I knew was inevitable. And I do think that has been shaped by just other experiences of marginalization. So I do think, I think there's a lot more to say about that, but I definitely believe that there is this interplay between other marginalized parts of one's identity and being a convert to Judaism as well.
I guess my point is that I will always push to be created equally, even though I know that will never happen. Because if I don't push, it'll never change. You know, it does need to change.
And thanks for the and thanks, you know, especially to Ignacio and Sharrone for just acknowledging that there are other things that make it more obvious that maybe you came in through a side door, shall we say. And for some people, it's easier to pass as perhaps a Jew by birth, unless you feel like sharing that you are a Jew by choice. I mean, I have the widest name in the entire world, and so I feel like it's always very obvious that I joined by choice. If you don't know and it doesn't show up on your screen, my last name is Smith, so it's always pretty obvious that I came in through my own doing, but also used to being able to do that, and that there's a privilege in that. So thanks both of you for bringing that up, and Jeff for raising the possible regrets situation. As we are winding down in our last little time here to sort of turn the situation towards family, and I know Ignacio, you had mentioned kind of some pushback on not having a Jewish family of origin, and also not having one by creation, and that has been sometimes hard to fit in for those reasons. And just to kind of open that up to Jane and to Sharrone as well, have you ever, I mean, we have to admit it, when we bring our children into this, that's a choice that sometimes we make for ourselves, and then we submit them to teasing, or perhaps worse, hopefully not, but, you know, if there are any thoughts about family going forward.
I think my family identifies who I am. And without my family, I'm nothing. My family personally have always been so welcomed and loved, from my little bitty granddaughter all the way to my husband and myself. So for me, family is my reason to exist. And certainly that reason has been so supportive and welcomed by Sinai. I just have a quick aside. My other speakers, you are so erudite and so in touch. It is a joy and a privilege to listen to you. Thank you so much for your insights, your words. I'm humbled by them.
She could not be more right. Sharrone.
I don't know what the question was, but I'm going to tell it the short story. Our oldest son, Noah, went to a camp, a Jewish teen group that does social justice work in the world. And the last one he did was in the South. And it was, unfortunately, it was when Trump was running for president. So the world was quite hot. And he's like, I want to do this trip. It's my last one because I'm going to turn whatever age. And it was Jewish teens going into the South. And, you know, Jeff and I are like, hold on, we'll talk about it and then let you know. And we're both like, you know, don't let him go. And then we got over ourselves, which is all of parenting, having fits and getting over yourself. And it was so important for him as a Black Jewish man. You know, he talked about being in the South and what that held as far as the history of this country and the way our country is. And then he talked about being Jewish and going to these really old Jewish communities and having, you know, he talks about this one Shabbat dinner he had in somewhere. And Bubba, I think his name was actually Bubba, and like had a firearm and like had it on the Shabbat table. I mean, just completely things that make me go, oh my God, bring my baby home. But the whole experience was really good for him because it got, he had a deeper experience of being Black and a deeper experience of being Jewish together with peers and connecting with other Black people from the South who were part of facilitating the whole thing. That always just really struck me as really unique and wonderful that he had that opportunity.
You see, CNN is going to have a new series where a guy is a person of color and Jewish, and he's going to be talking about his experiences traveling the world.
A lot to be seen. Yeah, I only ask, and sorry, facilitator's choice here, because some have had thoughts about, you know, what Ronan's life would have been like if he had stayed mixed and therefore not been quite so obvious in our last 2 years here as the country continues to shift. But thank you for indulging me and for sharing, Sharon.
Yeah, I want to say that I think that's a good question, and I really appreciate that the way that Ignacio raised that not it always seems to me that not being born into a Jewish family, and when you become Jewish, then you have to like create your own Jewish history, basically. I mean, you don't have that, right? And one way that the Jewish community so much does that is by way of kids and family. So some of the issue, although only a small part of it, obviously, Ignacio, but some of the issue that you raised is an issue for Jews who are not married with children in the Jewish community, no matter how they got there, right? Because there's so many things that are oriented towards family. Then you've got the other stuff that, so I may not have the Jewish kids, but I did have a Jewish grandmother, you know, that gave me some historical piece of that. But I think it's a really important, you know, I've always thought it was a really important thing that synagogues or Jewish communal institutions really need to look at, is that we're not just oriented to, you know, making you belong because of your kids kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think that speaks to just more broadly, though, when we do want to think about, you know, these issues of people that, of diversity, people that don't sort of fit the mold, that they're interconnected. Because completely, I agree that I think that if I were with a partner and kids, the fact that I'm a convert, that sort of connection would be completely different. But, you know, so it does intersect with this idea of there is a lot of expectations about having a Jewish family, and I think a lot of Jewish communal life is organized around that. So. Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Any other closing thoughts from Jane, Sharrone, and Ignacio about what was welcoming and what was not welcoming when you joined? And unless it was particularly terrible, I think we should leave out, you know, random things that one-off people said, but anything sort of systematic about how Sinai Reno was set up or how the Jewish community in general was set up that made it welcoming, made it feel like the home you were looking for.
The inclusion, the infection, and the welcoming. Socially, it was a place I needed and wanted to be, where people were concerned about social causes, were focused on family, and were unreserved in their affection for one another.
Rabbi Myra is one of my foundational rabbis. You know, Rabbi Michael is the other one who was there when I converted and I studied with, and Myra is the other one, is the other person. So that community was extremely important, and just the way you are in your skin, Rabbi, and your fire, and you know, watching you and you being there for me as an individual and my family has been has greatly improved my life, and I really appreciate it. And I hope one of the things that is pulled from this experience is really creating more spaces, and not just one, multiple spaces, intentionally for Jews who are single, and not just one, multiple places and spaces for that, because there's a place for, there's a place for all of us, and it's very generous, Ignacio, of you sharing this and giving us, even though I'm not there, an opportunity to do better and grow.
Or married and childless too, also is another space, but lots of spaces. I mean, that's been sort of the whole point of doing this series, I think, was to say that there's all kinds of places, you know, there's as a community, right? Everybody's got lots of different identities, and many of them don't get included in different ways here, there, or otherwhere. One that we haven't even talked about is economics, right? I mean, I think there's a horrible economic bias within the systemic Jewish community, and if you don't have a certain amount of money, you may really feel like you're not welcome. But you know, we've talked about lots of different aspects, and one of the things that strikes me is, you know, that the places, the synagogue space, where we will be coming together, not through a screen, is starting to open up. Slowly but surely, God willing, please. And I think that's a tremendous opportunity for all kinds of institutions, but certainly the synagogue, to really look at what kind of spaces we make and whether people really feel like they belong or don't. Right. And thank you, Sharon, for those sweet words. Right back at you.
She is the best. Yeah. So we'll do one last call for questions from the floor. And if there are not so many, we can end with a favorite story from each, but there are questions. It's a thoughtful group.
Yeah, or even comments, because I know there's
Questions and comments.
way more experiences in the faces I see on this screen, and then we haven't heard from them all. So.
I just want to thank everybody for this really wonderful hour to hear your stories, and it's super enriching. And I often see being Jew is a really hard thing sometimes because there's a lot of discrimination. So I'm always thrilled when people want to join. And it's fun to hear your stories. See, Steve told me his story the other day, and sounds very much like yours, Sharrone, too, that, wow, I made up a religion, but it was already there. So yeah, I'm just very grateful, Rabbi Myra and Jeff, that you put this forum together, and for the wonderful speakers. And I loved hearing your stories. So thank you.
If people have speakers in mind or topics that they think would enrich our community going forward, would you please let Myra or me know? And we have a few ideas, but we certainly like more suggestions. And particularly if you have a speaker you've heard or a topic that we haven't hit, please let us know.
And we're off for the summer now, but we'll pick up in the fall, presumably, God willing, except that we all know not to, I don't predict anything anymore.
Right. One format or the other, talking will keep happening for sure. Unless anybody has something formal to share, I think we might end whole group here, but I'm happy to stay on, as I imagine many of us are, until 4:30 if there are questions for people who just didn't feel like asking in a whole group format. Myra, does that?
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect. All right.
Absolutely.
Let's start. It was really, really wonderful to see everybody today.
It was. Thanks to everyone.
To our speakers and to our organizers.
Thank you all. And if you want to stick around, good. And if not, you're dismissed.
That's right.
Laura, I'm going to take the host.
Myra, you have the key to the record button?
Yeah, I'm gonna reclaim the host.
Okay.
Okay, and then I can stop. I think I can stop the record. Maybe I can't. Oh, there we go. Stop recording. Okay. So I stopped.